The galactic nexus hung in the void like a crown of light, its immense structure orbiting a dying star that pulsed faintly, as if struggling against the inevitable pull of time. The station was a masterpiece of alien engineering, its surface shimmering with panels that reflected the dim glow of the ancient star it encircled. It was said to be the heart of interstellar diplomacy, a place where the fates of civilizations were decided. For humanity, this was the culmination of centuries of exploration and ambition, a chance to claim their place among the stars. Commander Elias Rourke stood at the helm of the Solace, humanity's pride and joy, a sleek vessel that represented the best of Earth's ingenuity. His hands rested on the console before him, but his mind raced with anticipation. Through the massive viewport, the Nexus grew larger, its intricate design becoming clearer with every passing moment. Spires of metal and glass extended outward like the petals of a colossal flower, each glowing faintly with energy. Around it, ships of every imaginable shape and size drifted, some resembling crystalline shards, others like great living creatures, their surfaces pulsating with an organic rhythm. Elias's heart swelled with pride and hope. This was supposed to be humanity's moment of triumph, the day they were welcomed into the galactic community. Behind him, his team prepared for the historic meeting. Dr. Lyra Quinn, a scientist known for her sharp intellect and unwavering curiosity, adjusted the small device on her wrist that translated alien languages. Beside her, Lieutenant Marcus Hale, a seasoned diplomat, straightened his uniform, his face a mask of calm, though his eyes betrayed his nervousness. When the Solace docked, the humans stepped into the Nexus. The docking bay was vast, its ceiling disappearing into shadows above. The air was thick with the hum of alien machinery and the faint, unfamiliar sense of otherworldly atmospheres. The walls of the bay shimmered with shifting colors, as if alive, and the floor beneath their feet felt unnervingly warm, like the skin of some great beast. Elias glanced around, taking in the alien vessels parked alongside their own. Some gleamed like polished gemstones, their surfaces smooth and reflective, while others seemed to breathe, their exteriors expanding and contracting in a slow, rhythmic motion. But as the humans moved deeper into the station, the initial awe gave way to unease. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. The corridors, though grand and ornate, felt oppressively silent. When they reached the council chamber, the scale of the room was overwhelming. The ceiling arched high above, disappearing into darkness, while the walls were lined with tiered seating, each occupied by representatives of the galaxy's many species. Some were small and insect-like, their eyes glinting in the dim light. Others were massive, hulking forms that radiated an almost palpable sense of power. Elias could feel their eyes, or whatever equivalent they had, on him, studying, judging. At the center of the chamber stood three figures, each embodying an alien majesty that was both fascinating and terrifying. The Veer, a crystalline being, caught the light in a way that made it seem as though its jagged, diamond-like body was aflame. Its movements were sharp and deliberate, each step accompanied by a faint chiming sound. Beside it hovered the Luther, a gaseous entity contained within a transparent sphere that crackled with energy. Its swirling form shifted constantly, patterns of light rippling through its misty body. The third figure, the Kinth, was a collective hive mind, its body composed of thousands of tiny, insect-like creatures that moved in perfect unison, forming a humanoid shape. Elias stepped forward, his boots echoing in the vast chamber. He raised his hand in a gesture of peace, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "On behalf of humanity, we come in friendship," he said, his words amplified by the chamber's acoustics. For a moment, there was silence. Then the Veer speaker stepped forward, its crystalline body catching the light in a way that made it appear as though it were glowing from within. Its voice rang out, sharp and piercing, like the sound of glass shattering. Humanity has been judged. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Elias's breath caught in his throat. He glanced at Lyra, who looked equally stunned. The Veer continued, its tone cold and unyielding. You are evolutionarily unstable. Dangerous. Your adaptability is a threat to galactic harmony. Elias's mind raced. This wasn't what they had expected. They had come prepared to negotiate, to prove humanity's worth. But this was a condemnation. Unstable, he said, his voice rising. We've survived against impossible odds. We've thrived in the face of adversity. How is that a crime? The Luther's swirling form darkened, its voice a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the chamber. Precisely. Your kind grows stronger through chaos. Such instability cannot be allowed to spread. Elias clenched his fists, his frustration boiling over. You're punishing us for surviving? For striving to be better. His voice echoed in the vast chamber, but the council remained unmoved. The Kinth, its countless insect-like components shifting and clicking, spoke in a voice that was eerily calm, yet filled with finality. The decision is made. Earth will be quarantined. Your people will remain confined to your solar system. Any attempt to leave will be met with force. Elias felt a wave of despair wash over him. This wasn't just a rejection, it was a prison sentence for all of humanity. As the humans were escorted out of the chamber, the weight of the council's judgment pressed down on them like a physical force. Back aboard the Solace, the team sat in silence, the reality of their situation sinking in. Dr. Lyra Quinn broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. They fear us, she said, her eyes distant. Not for what we are, but for what we could become. Elias stared out the viewport at the Nexus, its lights cold and distant. In that moment, he made a silent vow. Humanity would not be caged. They would find a way to rise, no matter the cost. The news of the quarantine spread like wildfire across Earth, igniting a storm of despair and outrage. Hope, once a flame burning brightly in the hearts of billions, was now reduced to smoldering embers. In every city, from the towering skyscrapers of New Shanghai to the ancient streets of Cairo, protests erupted. Crowds filled the streets, their voices a mixture of anger and desperation. Signs and banners waved in the air, their messages clear: we will not be caged. Some wept openly, their dreams of exploring the stars shattered. Others screamed at the heavens, fists raised as if defying the invisible chains that now bound them. Governments scrambled to respond, but there was little they could do. The Sentinel Array, a network of massive automated platforms stationed at the edge of the solar system, loomed like silent sentinels. Each one was an immense construct of alien origin, bristling with weapons that glowed faintly with an eerie, otherworldly light. They floated in the void, their presence a constant reminder of humanity's imprisonment. Any ship that dared to approach the boundary would be met with swift and merciless destruction. The stars, once a symbol of infinite possibility, now felt like a cruel taunt, so close, yet forever out of reach. In the shadows of the United Earth Command's war room, the air was heavy with tension. The room itself was a stark contrast to the chaos outside, its walls lined with screens displaying data and reports from across the globe. The leaders of Earth sat around a long table, their faces etched with worry and doubt. Some whispered among themselves, their voices hushed and uncertain, while others sat in silence, staring blankly at the table before them. Admiral Helena Kale stood at the head of the room, her presence commanding and unyielding. She was a woman of unshakable resolve, her silver hair pulled back tightly, her uniform immaculate. Her eyes, sharp and piercing, scanned the room, taking in the fear and hesitation of those around her. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and defiant, cutting through the murmur like a blade. "They think they've caged us," she began, her tone calm but laced with an undercurrent of steel. "They think they've broken us. But they're wrong." She stepped forward, her boots echoing softly against the polished floor. "All they've done is given us a challenge. And humanity has never backed down from a challenge." The room fell silent, all eyes on her. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "If we can't move forward, we'll move sideways. If we can't go through the front door, we'll find another way. That's who we are. That's what we've always done." Helena turned to the large screen at the end of the room, which displayed a map of the galaxy. Her hand moved to a section of the map marked in red, a vast expanse of space labeled as uncharted and hostile. The Council had deemed these regions uninhabitable, filled with barren worlds, deadly radiation, and unstable stars. To most, they were wastelands. But to Helena, they were an opportunity. "This is where we go," she said, her voice firm. "The Council thinks these regions are useless. They think no one can survive there. But they don't know us. We've survived worse. We've thrived in conditions that would destroy others. And we'll do it again." Her words hung in the air, powerful and unyielding. But the room was not without dissent. One of the leaders, a man with graying hair and a weary expression, leaned forward, his voice heavy with doubt. "Admiral, this is suicide," he said. "Those regions are barren, hostile. Even if we could survive, what would we gain? Resources. Territory. It's not enough. We'd be sending people to their deaths." Helena's eyes burned with determination as she met his gaze. "That's what they think," she replied, her voice unwavering. "But they've underestimated us before. We've built cities in deserts, dug life out of frozen tundras, and thrived in the depths of the oceans. We've turned wastelands into homes. And we'll do it again." She stepped closer to the table, her presence almost magnetic. "They've put us in a cage, but they've forgotten one thing: cages are meant to hold the weak. We are not weak. We'll adapt. We'll thrive where no one else can. And when the time comes, we'll show them that humanity cannot be contained." The room was silent again, but this time, the silence was different. It was not the silence of doubt, but of contemplation. Slowly, one by one, the leaders began to nod, their expressions shifting from fear to resolve. Helena's words had ignited something within them, a spark of hope, a reminder of humanity's indomitable spirit. As the meeting ended, Helena stood alone in the room, staring at the map of the galaxy. Her fingers traced the edges of the uncharted regions, her mind already racing with plans. She knew the path ahead would be treacherous. There would be sacrifices, losses, and moments of doubt. But she also knew that humanity's greatest strength was its ability to rise from the ashes, to find light in the darkest of places. Outside the war room, the protests continued, the voices of billions echoing across the planet. But amidst the chaos, a new resolve was taking shape. The stars were no longer a dream denied, they were a challenge waiting to be conquered. And humanity, as it always had, was ready to rise to the occasion. The years that followed the quarantine were cloaked in quiet defiance, a silent rebellion carried out in the shadows of the galaxy. Humanity, once bound by the chains of despair, had risen to the challenge. They had turned their gaze from the stars they could not reach to the desolate corners of space that no one else dared to claim. These were the forgotten places, the cursed worlds left untouched by the Galactic Council, barren, hostile, and deemed uninhabitable. But to humanity, they were opportunities waiting to be seized. On the frozen moon of Kalis, the air was sharp and biting, a constant reminder of the moon's unforgiving nature. The surface was a wasteland of endless ice, stretching as far as the eye could see, glittering under the faint light of a distant sun. The wind howled through the jagged ice formations, carrying with it a bone-deep chill that could freeze exposed skin in seconds. Yet beneath this frozen hell, life thrived. Deep below the surface, engineers had carved out a sanctuary. Vast domed cities shimmered like jewels beneath the ice, their translucent walls glowing faintly with the warmth of life within. The domes were powered by geothermal energy, drawn from the moon's molten core. Inside, the air was warm and filled with the hum of machinery, a stark contrast to the deadly cold above. Towers of metal and glass rose toward the domed ceilings, their lights casting long shadows over streets bustling with activity. People moved with purpose, their faces marked by a quiet determination. They had turned a wasteland into a home. Nova Kane, a young engineer with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, stood at the edge of one of the great observation decks, her breath fogging the glass as she stared out at the icy expanse beyond. The glow of the domes reflected off the ice, creating a surreal, otherworldly landscape. She pressed her gloved hand against the cold glass, her dark eyes filled with wonder. "They called this place a wasteland," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the faint hum of the city around her. A small smile tugged at her lips. "To us, it's a new beginning." But Kalis was only one piece of the puzzle. Across the galaxy, humanity was rewriting the rules of survival. On the radiation-soaked world of Pyros, where the atmosphere shimmered with deadly energy and the ground cracked and hissed with toxic gases, scientists worked tirelessly. The skies above Pyros were a swirling mix of purple and green, alive with the constant flicker of radiation storms. The air was thick and heavy, unbreathable for any unprotected life. Yet, in the shadow of jagged, blackened mountains, research stations stood resilient, their surfaces scarred by the elements but unbroken. Inside these stations, humanity's brightest minds pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Geneticists and biologists worked day and night, developing modifications that allowed humans to endure the unendurable. Skin that could resist radiation burns, lungs that could filter poison from the air, eyes that could see through the storm's chaos. These were the gifts of progress, born from necessity. The people of Pyros were no longer fully human in the traditional sense, but they were survivors, living proof of humanity's ability to adapt. In the asteroid belts that drifted in the cold void between worlds, hidden bases became the lifeblood of humanity's secret empire. These bases were carved into the very bones of the asteroids, their entrances concealed by layers of rock and ice. Inside, the air was thick with the sounds of industry. Machines roared and hissed, sparks flying as engineers and workers toiled to create the tools of humanity's survival. Metals were forged, ships were built, and new technologies were born in these hidden sanctuaries. It was here that the specters were created, sleek, stealthy ships designed to slip through the void undetected. Their surfaces absorbed light, rendering them nearly invisible to the naked eye, while advanced cloaking systems shielded them from sensors. The specters became the silent lifeline of humanity's growing empire, carrying supplies, information, and people to the farthest reaches of their hidden domains. They were ghosts in the darkness, unseen and unstoppable. Despite their progress, humanity's empire remained a closely guarded secret. the Galactic Council could not know what was happening in the shadows of their dominion. Not yet. Every move was made with the utmost caution, every step forward shrouded in secrecy. For now, humanity's survival depended on their ability to remain unseen. But even in the shadows, there was pride. Novocaine felt it as she stood on Kalis, watching the glow of the domes against the icy landscape. She felt it in the hum of the city around her, in the laughter of children playing in the artificial parks, in the determined faces of her fellow engineers. Across the galaxy, in the radiation storms of Pyros, in the hidden depths of the asteroid bases, and in the silent flight of the specters, humanity was proving something to themselves, if not yet to the Council. They were more than survivors. They were creators, innovators, and dreamers. They were a force that could not be contained. And though the stars remained out of reach, humanity's light burned brighter than ever, casting long shadows across the galaxy. Shadows of progress. Shadows of defiance. The eclipse drifted silently on the edge of the Perseus Rift, its dark hull blending seamlessly with the endless expanse of stars. The rift was a place few dared to venture, a region of space shrouded in myth and danger, where navigation systems faltered and whispers of ghostly phenomena chilled even the bravest explorers. But Captain Darius Venn and his crew were not ordinary explorers. They were seekers of the unknown, driven by humanity's insatiable curiosity and the need to carve a future in the shadows. For weeks, they had combed the region, chasing faint anomalies and fragments of ancient signals. The crew had grown weary, their spirits weighed down by the oppressive silence of the void. Then, as if the rift itself had decided to reveal its secrets, they found it. The ruins emerged from the darkness like a dream or a nightmare. Vast structures loomed before them, their surfaces intricately carved with patterns that seemed to shift and flow when viewed from different angles. The ruins were unlike anything humanity had ever seen, a breathtaking blend of artistry and engineering that spoke of a civilization both advanced and profoundly creative. Towers of shimmering metal rose like frozen waves, their peaks crowned with glowing orbs that pulsed faintly, as if still alive. Bridges arched gracefully between the towers, their spans impossibly thin yet unbroken after what must have been millennia. As the crew stepped cautiously onto the surface of the ancient site, the air inside their suits seemed heavier, as though the weight of history pressed down on them. The ground beneath their boots was smooth and cold, etched with strange symbols that glowed faintly with a soft, golden light. The silence was eerie, broken only by the faint hum of the ruins, a sound that seemed to resonate deep within their bones. Captain Darius Venn, a man of quiet intensity and sharp instincts, led the way. His dark eyes scanned every detail, his mind racing to comprehend the magnitude of their discovery. He had seen many wonders in his years of exploration, but this was different. This was something ancient, something sacred. In the heart of the ruins, they found a data core, a glowing sphere of crystalline material suspended in a cradle of metal and light. The core pulsed gently, as if aware of their presence. Darius approached it slowly, his gloved hand hovering over its surface before finally making contact. The moment his fingers brushed the core, it flared to life, projecting a cascade of images and information into the air around them. What they saw left them speechless. The holographic projections told the story of the Forerunners, a species that had once thrived across the galaxy. They were innovators, dreamers, much like humanity. The Forerunners had advanced rapidly, their brilliance illuminating the darkest corners of the cosmos. They had solved problems the Galactic Council deemed impossible, creating technologies that defied understanding and reshaping entire worlds to suit their needs. Their cities were marvels of beauty and functionality, their culture a symphony of art and science. but their brilliance had made them a target. The Council, fearing the Forerunners' potential, had turned against them. The holograms depicted scenes of devastation: Forerunner cities reduced to ash, their people hunted and slaughtered. The Council's fleets descended upon their worlds like a plague, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. The Forerunners had not disappeared, as history had suggested. They had been erased, their existence wiped from the galaxy's memory, their achievements buried beneath layers of lies and time. Darius stood frozen, his gaze locked on the images before him. The weight of the truth settled heavily on his shoulders, a cold fury burning in his chest. "They didn't just vanish," he said, his voice low and trembling with restrained anger. "They were erased." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the enormity of the revelation sinking in. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a warning. The Council's fear of progress, of innovation, had driven them to commit genocide. And now, humanity stood in the same precarious position, their own rapid advancements drawing the Council's wary eyes. When the Eclipse returned to humanity's hidden empire, the data core was brought before Admiral Helena Kale and the leaders of Earth. The room was silent as the holograms played, the story of the Forerunners unfolding before them. As the final images faded, leaving only the soft glow of the data core, Helena rose from her seat. Her expression was unreadable, her sharp eyes fixed on the glowing sphere. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, her voice cut through the silence, steady and resolute. "The Council fears us because they see the Forerunners in us," she said, her words carrying the weight of undeniable truth. "They see our potential, our ability to rise above their control. And they will try to destroy us, just as they destroyed them." Her gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of each leader in turn. "But this time," she continued, her voice rising with conviction, "we won't let them. We've learned their secrets, uncovered the truth they tried to bury. The Forerunners' legacy will not be forgotten. It will live on in us." The room erupted in murmurs, a mixture of fear and determination. The leaders understood the stakes now. The Council would not stop until humanity was either subdued or eradicated. But they also knew that humanity was not the same as the Forerunners. They had learned from the past, from their own struggles and triumphs. They were not just survivors, they were fighters, dreamers, and creators. As the meeting ended, Helena stood alone with the data core, her reflection shimmering in its golden light. She placed a hand on its surface, her expression softening for just a moment. "You won't be forgotten," she whispered, as if speaking to the ghosts of the Forerunners. "Your story will guide us. And this time, we'll write an ending they can't erase." In the shadows of the galaxy, humanity prepared for what was to come. The ruins of the Forerunners had given them more than knowledge, they had given them purpose. The Council's grip on the stars would not last forever. The forgotten legacy of the Forerunners would become the foundation of humanity's defiance, a beacon of hope in the darkness. And as the Eclipse prepared for its next journey, Darius Venn stood on the bridge, staring out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Council watched, waiting for humanity to falter. But Darius knew one thing with unshakable certainty: humanity would not be erased. Not this time. The Resolute glided through the cold silence of space, its sleek form cutting through the endless void like a predator on the hunt. Captain Myra Solis stood on the bridge, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness beyond the ship's reinforced windows. The outskirts of human space were quiet, almost too quiet, a stark contrast to the bustling life hidden in humanity's secret colonies. Here, the stars seemed dimmer, their light struggling against the oppressive black. It was the perfect place for shadows to move unseen and for danger to strike. The stillness was broken by a sudden, frantic signal. It came in bursts, distorted and weak, but unmistakably a cry for help. Myra's crew worked quickly, tracing the source of the distress call to a nearby sector. As the Resolute approached, the scene unfolded before them, a lone alien vessel under siege, surrounded by sleek pirate ships that darted around it like vultures circling a dying beast. The alien ship was unlike any Myra had seen before. Its hull shimmered with a faint, iridescent glow, and its design was elegant, almost organic, as if it had grown rather than been built. But it was battered and struggling, its engines flickering weakly as the pirates fired relentless volleys of plasma at its shields. Myra's instincts screamed at her to intervene, but protocol held her back. Humanity's survival depended on secrecy, and revealing themselves to outsiders was a risk they could not afford. Yet as she watched the alien ship shudder under another brutal hit, something inside her hardened. She couldn't just stand by and let them die. "Prepare to engage," she ordered, her voice steady but firm. The crew hesitated for only a moment before springing into action. The Resolute surged forward, its weapons blazing. The pirate ships, caught off guard, scattered like startled insects. One by one, Myra's crew took them down with precision strikes, until the last of the attackers fled into the void. As the dust settled, the alien ship drifted, its lights flickering weakly. Myra ordered a cautious approach, her heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and uncertainty. The decision to intervene had been hers alone, and the consequences were yet to unfold. When the alien ship finally responded to their hails, the face that appeared on the screen was both strange and striking. The Thorax captain, Arlen, had a tall, slender frame covered in a smooth, chitinous exoskeleton that shimmered faintly under the ship's dim lighting. His eyes were large and multifaceted, reflecting the light like polished gemstones. Despite his alien appearance, there was something unmistakably familiar in the way he looked at Myra: gratitude, curiosity, and a cautious hope. "You saved us," Erlin said, his voice resonating with a melodic hum that seemed to echo in the air. "We owe you our lives." Myra inclined her head, her expression calm but guarded. "We couldn't stand by and watch you be destroyed," she replied simply. "Who were those attackers?" "Pirates," Arlen answered, his tone tinged with bitterness. "They prey on the weak, knowing the council turns a blind eye. We are traitors, nothing more, but their kind see us as easy targets." Over the following hours, the two captains spoke at length. Myra learned that the Thorax were a nomadic species, traveling the galaxy in search of trade and sustenance. Once, they had thrived under the Council's rule, but as the Council's grip tightened, the Thorax found themselves suffocated by regulations and taxes designed to keep them subservient. Their fleets dwindled, their people scattered, until they were little more than wandering exiles, struggling to survive in the cracks of the galaxy's vast machine. Arlen's voice grew heavy as he recounted his people's plight. "We both suffered under their rule," he said, his multifaceted eyes locking onto Myra's. "But we are not without value. We've seen the Council's workings from within. We know their weaknesses, their blind spots. If you would share your strength with us, we could share our knowledge with you." Myra studied him carefully, her mind racing. An alliance with the Thorax could be a game changer, but it was also a risk. Trusting an alien species, even one as seemingly desperate as the Thorax, was a gamble. But as she looked into Arlen's eyes, she saw no deception, only a shared pain that mirrored humanity's own. "An alliance," she said slowly, testing the word. "What would that look like?" Arlen leaned forward, his voice taking on a tone of quiet determination. You hide in the shadows, just as we do. Together, we can move unseen, sharing what we know and what we have. Your technology, disguised as ours, could give us the strength to stand against the Council. And in return, we will be your eyes and ears in the places you cannot go. Myra nodded, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. Then it's agreed. The alliance between humanity and the Thorax began quietly, like a seed planted in secret soil. At first, there was hesitation on both sides, a mutual wariness born of years spent in isolation and mistrust. But as time passed, the bond grew stronger. The Thorax proved invaluable, providing intelligence on Council movements and operations, while humanity shared their technology, carefully disguised to appear as Thorax innovations. For the first time, humanity was no longer alone. They had found an ally in their fight against the Council's oppression, a partner who understood their struggle and shared their vision of a future free from tyranny. In the dimly lit halls of the Thorax mothership, Myra and Arlen often met to discuss strategy and share stories of their people's resilience. One evening, as they stood together overlooking the vast expanse of space, Arlen spoke softly. "We've both been pushed to the edges, forced to survive in the cracks of their empire," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But together, we can build something stronger. Something they cannot break." Myra turned to him, her gaze steady. "Then we fight," she said simply. "For both our peoples." But even as the alliance flourished, shadows began to stir. The Council, ever watchful, began to notice the subtle shifts in the galaxy's balance. Rumors of Thorax ships with technology far beyond their means reached their ears, and whispers of humanity's survival grew louder. The Council's eyes turned toward the dark corners of the galaxy, their suspicion sharpening like a blade. In the quiet corridors of the Resolute, Myra prepared for the storm she knew was coming. The Alliance had given humanity hope, but it had also painted a target on their backs. The Council would not stand idly by as their control slipped away. As the stars stretched endlessly before her, Myra clenched her fists, her resolve unshaken. Humanity had found an ally, but the fight was far from over. Together with the Thorax, they would face whatever came next. And this time, they would not fight alone. The stars above Aegis 7 shimmered with an unnatural stillness, as if the galaxy itself held its breath. The colony lay nestled on the barren surface of a rocky moon, its domed habitats and industrial structures stark against the jagged terrain. To the untrained eye, it seemed vulnerable, a small, isolated outpost clinging to life in the cold void of space. But beneath its unassuming exterior, Aegis 7 was anything but defenseless. It was a trap, a carefully constructed snare waiting for its prey. Far beyond the colony's orbit, the Council's fleet emerged from hyperspace in a flash of cold, white light. Their ships were sleek and vast, their hulls gleaming with the insignias of authority and power. This was no mere patrol, it was an armada, assembled with one purpose: to crush the human threat before it could spread. The Council had tolerated whispers of humanity's survival for too long. Now, they would silence those whispers with fire and steel. On the bridge of the flagship Eminence, High Commander Thalrose stood tall, his imposing figure framed by the glow of tactical displays. His face was etched with the cold certainty of someone who believed utterly in the Council's supremacy. "Begin the assault," he ordered, his voice a low rumble that carried the weight of finality. "Leave nothing standing." The fleet advanced, their formation precise and unyielding. Fighters swarmed ahead like a cloud of locusts, their engines roaring as they descended toward the colony. Orbital bombardment cannons charged with a low hum, their barrels glowing ominously as they prepared to unleash devastation. The Council's forces moved with the confidence of a predator closing in on its prey. But as they neared the colony, something changed. The silence of Aegis 7 was broken not by cries of panic or desperate pleas for mercy, but by a sudden, deafening roar. Hidden turrets erupted from the rocky terrain, their barrels swiveling with mechanical precision. Blinding streams of plasma and railgun fire tore through the Council's fighters, shredding their formations in an instant. Missiles streaked upward from concealed silos, their trails of smoke twisting like serpents as they sought out their targets. The Council fleet faltered, confusion rippling through their ranks. This was no helpless colony. This was a fortress, and it was ready for them. From the shadows of the asteroid belt, the Spectre ships emerged. Sleek and black as the void, they moved like phantoms, their hulls absorbing light and radar alike. They slipped into the Council's formation with deadly grace, their weapons striking with pinpoint accuracy. One by one, Council ships were crippled, their engines silenced and their weapons rendered useless. The Spectres were relentless, their attacks precise and unyielding, like wolves tearing into a cornered beast. On the ground, the battle was no less fierce. Council dropships descended in waves, their troops pouring out onto the rocky surface. They expected to face disorganized resistance farmers with rifles, perhaps, or hastily assembled militia. What they found instead were soldiers clad in advanced exoskeletons, their movements swift and fluid, their strength and speed amplified beyond human limits. The Council's troops fought with discipline and determination, but they were no match for the humans' ingenuity. The exoskeletons allowed the human soldiers to move like shadows, darting between cover and striking with devastating force. Plasma rifles crackled in the thin atmosphere, their bolts of energy cutting through the Council's armor like paper. Mines hidden beneath the surface detonated with thunderous force, scattering the invaders and sowing chaos in their ranks. High above the battlefield, Commander Thalrose watched in mounting disbelief. His fleet was in disarray, his ground forces overwhelmed. This was not the easy victory he had promised his superiors. This was a disaster. How could this happen, he growled, his fists clenching as he stared at the tactical displays. How could they be so prepared? The answer was obvious, though he refused to admit it. Humanity had not merely survived, they had thrived, growing stronger and smarter in the shadows. They had studied the Council's tactics, learned their weaknesses, and turned them against their oppressors. This was not the desperate resistance of a dying species. This was a calculated strike, a message written in fire and blood. As the battle raged on, the Council fleet began to break. Ships turned and fled, their captains abandoning the fight in a desperate bid to save themselves. On the ground, the remaining Council troops surrendered, their weapons discarded as they fell to their knees before the advancing human soldiers. The once mighty armada was shattered, its confidence reduced to ash. When the dust settled, Aegis 7 stood untouched, its defenses still humming with quiet menace. The humans had won, but the victory was more than just a military triumph. It was a statement, a declaration to the galaxy that humanity would not be erased. They were no longer the hunted, they were the hunters. In the aftermath, as the wreckage of the Council fleet drifted silently through space, Captain Myra Lee stood among her soldiers on the surface of Aegis 7. The air was thin and cold, but the fire in her chest burned bright. She looked out over the battlefield, her gaze hard and unyielding. "They'll come back," one of her officers said, his voice low. "You know they will." Myra nodded, her expression grim but resolute. "Let them," she said. "We'll be ready." Far away, in the heart of the Council's territory, the news of the defeat spread like wildfire. The council's leaders convened in secret, their voices raised in anger and fear. The humans were no longer a distant memory, a ghost of the past. They were a threat, a force to be reckoned with. And for the first time in centuries, the council felt the cold sting of doubt. The galaxy was changing. Humanity had risen from the ashes, their defiance burning brighter than the stars. And as the council licked its wounds, one truth became clear: this was only the beginning. The galaxy was never silent. It hummed with the whispers of stars and the endless chatter of civilizations, each voice a thread in the vast tapestry of existence. But after the battle at Aegis 7, those whispers turned into a roar. Humanity, long thought extinct, had not only survived but struck back with a vengeance. And now, the truth hidden for centuries was about to unravel. The Forerunner data was released without warning. It spread like wildfire, carried on encrypted channels, smuggled aboard trading ships, and whispered in the dark corners of galactic hubs. The files were a damning chronicle of the Council's sins: entire species erased, planets stripped of life, and rebellions crushed with brutal efficiency. The Council, once revered as the galaxy's shepherds, was exposed as its oppressors. Across the galaxy, the younger species, those who had lived under the Council's shadow, reacted with shock and fury. On the industrial moons of the Kirin, workers abandoned their posts, their chants of rebellion echoing through the mines. The aquatic cities of the Lyran pulsed with bioluminescent protests, their waters roiling with anger. Even the stoic Varn, known for their unshakable loyalty, began to question the Council's authority. And then came the Thorax. Once scattered and voiceless, the nomadic species stepped forward, their declaration reverberating across the stars. They stood with humanity, their alliance a symbol of defiance and hope. One by one, others followed. Species that had long endured the Council's iron grip now found courage in humanity's resilience. The galaxy, once fractured and fearful, began to unite. But the Council was not so easily defeated. In their desperation, they convened in the grand halls of the Nexus, their voices raised in anger and panic. Some called for negotiations, their fear of further rebellion outweighing their pride. Others, like Grand Marshal Corran of the Vair, refused to yield. Corran, a towering figure of iron will and burning eyes, saw humanity not as a symbol of hope but as a threat that had to be extinguished. "They are a disease," Corran declared, his voice like thunder. "And we will cut them out before they spread further." Against the advice of his peers, Corran gathered what remained of the Council's fleet. His target was Earth itself, the heart of humanity's resurgence. He believed that by striking at their home, he could shatter their spirit and force the galaxy back into submission. But Earth was not defenseless. Not anymore. Admiral Kale, now in her twilight years, stood once more at the helm of humanity's forces. Her hair was silver, and her face bore the lines of decades spent in battle, but her eyes burned with the same fierce determination that had carried her through countless wars. She had seen humanity rise from the ashes, and she would not let them fall again. As the Council fleet approached Earth, the void seemed to tighten, heavy with anticipation. Then, from the shadows, humanity's allies emerged. Ships of every shape and size, their hulls bearing the marks of dozens of species, formed an unbreakable wall around the blue planet. It was a sight unlike any the galaxy had ever seen, a coalition born not of fear or conquest, but of unity and hope. The battle that followed was fierce, a symphony of chaos and fire. The Council's ships, though powerful, were outmaneuvered by the combined might of humanity and its allies. The Spectre ships danced through the enemy lines, their weapons striking with deadly precision. Thorax vessels, their shimmering hulls reflecting the light of distant stars, unleashed devastating volleys of plasma. And at the heart of it all was Kale, her voice steady as she directed the battle with the precision of a master strategist. The Council fleet faltered, then broke. One by one, their ships were disabled or destroyed, until only Corran's flagship remained. Even then, the Grand Marshal refused to surrender. It took a daring boarding operation led by a team of human and Thorax soldiers to finally capture him. As he was dragged from the wreckage of his ship, his defiance turned to silence, his burning eyes dimmed by the weight of defeat. The Council's power was broken. Their fleets were in ruins, their authority shattered. In the wake of their defeat, the galaxy began to rebuild not in the image of the old order, but in something entirely new. On the Nexus, the former seat of the Council's power, representatives from dozens of species gathered. The air was charged with anticipation, the kind that comes before the breaking of a storm. At the center of the Grand Chamber stood Ambassador Liana Vale, her presence commanding yet warm. She was humanity's voice in this new era, and as she stepped forward, the room fell silent. The galaxy tried to contain us, she began, her voice steady and clear. They cast us out, erased our history, and sought to break us. But they failed. And in their failure, they taught us something powerful, that we are stronger together than we could ever be apart. Her words resonated deeply, not just with humanity's allies but with those who had once feared or distrusted them. She spoke of unity, of a future where no species would live in fear of annihilation. Of a galaxy where strength was measured not by the power to oppress, but by the courage to stand together. And so, the Stellar Accord was born. Its flag, a symbol of unity and hope, was raised above the Nexus, its colors reflected in the eyes of those who had fought and sacrificed for this moment. Ships from every corner of the galaxy launched in unison, their lights blending into a brilliant constellation that lit up the darkness of space. It was a new dawn, not just for humanity, but for all who had suffered under the old order. On Earth, Admiral Kale watched the ceremony from her hospital bed. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of medical equipment and the soft rustle of wind through the open window. Her body was frail, worn down by years of service, but her spirit remained unbroken. As the flag of the Stellar Accord rose on the screen before her, tears welled in her eyes. "They cast us out," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "But we came back stronger than they ever imagined." The galaxy had changed. Humanity, once a forgotten remnant, had become a beacon of hope. And as the stars watched over this new era, they seemed to shine a little brighter, as if celebrating the resilience of those who had dared to dream of something better.